Hello and a warm welcome from me, David Foster. People across Turkey have been remembering a night 4 years ago that changed the course of the country's modern history. An attempted coup was defeated, setting Turkey on a new trajectory at home and abroad. This is Roundtable. Well, today we're focusing on how a night in July 2016 reshaped Turkey's relations with neighbours and altered its alliances on the world stage. 4 years on, what have we learned about Turkey as a global actor?
Turkey has seen several failed and successful coup attempts in its history, but the 15th of July was a pivotal moment. Belated condemnations after the coup attempt caused a deep crisis of confidence in its traditional allies, causing Ankara to re-examine its foreign policy priorities and how it would address its own security concerns. Though it previously played the role of mediator in conflicts in its immediate neighbourhood, it has projected its military power in northern Syria. In Libya, it's providing support to the UN-recognised government of national accord against the warlord Khalifa Haftar, who's backed by the UAE, France and Russia. Improving relations with Moscow led to Turkey's purchase of the S-400 missile defence system from Russia, in addition to increased trade, while closer ties with Tehran have resulted in boost in tourism. Turkey's transformation from an aid recipient to an aid donor has seen the country described as a new humanitarian power. And expanding business and cultural exchanges in Africa have led to a fivefold increase in trade from 2003 to over $20 billion in 2018. Since the attempted coup was defeated in 2016, Turkey's increasingly assertive foreign policy has meant many of its traditional alliances have shifted as it carves out a new path on the world stage.
Very pleased to be able to welcome from Ankara, the Turkish capital, Cevdet Yilmaz, former Deputy Prime Minister of Turkey. We say hello also to David Hearst. He's in London and is the Editor-in-Chief of Middle East Eye. And finally, Onur Erim joins us from Istanbul, political analyst and director of Dragoman Strategies, a political and defence consulting firm. Cevdet, let me go back to you first of all. The night of the attempted coup, who was in touch from outside Turkey with the president, with the authorities? Was it the West or was it Russia and Iran?
Actually, rather than those people outside, it was the people of Turkey, actually, our nation. That night, Mr. Erdogan made a great leadership to our nation to defend our democracy, sacrificing their lives on the streets. And actually, it was the people, the nation itself, that has showed it is a strong ownership to its own destiny, actually. Unfortunately, the feeling in our nation is that our Western friends, they were not with us in this evening. That is the feeling, actually. They have just observed the developments, and they didn't show enough support, solidarity with Turkish nation that have, as I said, sacrificed their lives on the street to defend their democracy, their elected government, and their destiny, actually. That was more or less the feeling in this evening.
Do you think Turkey felt abandoned by the West and has carried that policy through for the last 4 years, forming alliances elsewhere?
Actually, Turkey has never changed, made a radical change in its policies. We never seen as, we are in between three continents and we have multiple ties with the rest of the world. So Turkey has always established relations with its neighbors, with the Asian people, with Africa, with Europe. So we haven't seen these relations as an alternative to our Western friendships. But of course, as I said, in this night, we felt that we didn't see enough solidarity from our Western friends, and that was actually a disappointment on our side. And we believe that Western democracies should show their solidarity when there is a threat to to another democracy. Unfortunately, we haven't seen this strong support, and of course, it has reduced our confidence to our allies in the Western world. That was not a good experience. I don't mean every country, but most of the countries in this night haven't shown enough support to Turkish people. And we should question this. Even the media.
Let me put that, if I may, to David Hearst. I mean, the former Deputy Prime Minister there using rather diplomatic language. Let me put it this way. Do you think Turkey felt betrayed by the West, and has its foreign policy axis shifted more towards Russia and perhaps Iran?
Well, the answer is yes. This was an unambiguously military coup. It was, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, the former Deputy Prime Minister, it was citizens of all political colours with their fists and kitchen utensils against live ammunition, tanks and planes. And yet the US administration did everything in its power to avoid calling it a coup, just as they did with Egypt's deposed President Morsi 3 years earlier. The US Embassy in Ankara, in its emergency message to US citizens, called it an uprising. And in Washington, the then US Secretary of State John Kerry hoped for stability, peace, and continuity within Turkey. In other words, the US wasn't calling it a coup and would work with whoever came out on top. In the meantime, the media owned by Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, like BBC Arabic, Sky News Arabic, Al Arabiya, and most of the US networks, who were not controlled by the Saudis, were running commentaries through the night saying Erdogan was finished or he had fled to Germany. And even my own former paper, The Guardian in London, ran a piece whose first headline was "How Recep Tayyip Erdogan Inflamed Tensions in Turkey." Therefore, the West was completely set for a successful coup, and it was not just sitting on the sidelines. I think it was very anti-Erdogan certainly in the first hours of the coup, when it was clear or not whether it was before Erdogan had landed, the plane had landed at Istanbul airport, and that we knew he was alive. And in that time, it was very, very tense. Since then, yes, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, there has been a real lack of support. The European Union pulled no punches, documenting Turkish authorities' infringements on democratic and human rights. And the US, on the other hand, repeatedly refused to extradite Fethullah Gulen, who was the coup leader. So it's been a difficult time, and I think it's made a very fundamental change in Turkish foreign policy. I think it's an exaggeration to say that the relations with the West are ruptured, but I feel that Turkey, and we can discuss this further in Syria and in Libya, is much more independent. It's basically weighed its anchor. And is operating a genuinely independent foreign policy, irrespective of its ties with NATO and irrespective of its ties with the US. It still wants to keep in with the US, but it balances that much more with its relationship with Russia. The first person who called, as far as I'm aware, and I could be corrected on this, and congratulated President Erdogan was Vladimir Putin, and that was a shrewd move.
Okay, so let's bring in Onur here, and I'm going to throw a quote at you. Well, it's not, it's just more of a statement. It's from an independent development research institute in Norway called CMI, and it's written this: "We observe some sort of, quote, strongman brotherhood between Putin and Erdogan, creating a unified front against Western criticisms regarding their domestic and foreign policies." What kind of chemistry is there between Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Vladimir Putin, would you say?
There's definitely a stronger connection than before, but let's not forget that Turkey has been in a more of a proactive role when it comes to her own foreign policy. We're trying to implement, which we hadn't before at all, from what I read and what I lived through in my life in Turkey, from a point of doing most of, or if not all of the things that the West wanted from Turkey, to a position where it has to be a winning situation for Turkey as well. So when you look at it from that perspective, you could see that although there is a much better relationship with Putin and Erdogan, Turkey and Russia, it's at a point where it has to be a win-win. It is, Turkey, you could see Turkey taking positions with the US, being opposed to Russia. Same thing with EU, being opposed to Russia, or or vice versa. So we're not, I guess the world has been used to Turkey aligning with one part and going with that partner for better or for worse. Now, we moved from that to a point where Turkey will continue to cooperate with Russia, with EU, with US, or whomever, as long as there is it's mutually beneficial for both parts. We shall not anymore, continue with one partner as we did for the past at least 60, 70 years, just with US, just with NATO, just with EU, even if it was against our own good. So I think it's a new position that Turkey is taking when it's approaching in all of its foreign matters, all of its diplomatic relationship, that it has to be a win-win. We're not going to say yes or no to something if it's good for NATO or if it's good for US or if it's good for Russia. It has to be also good.
We will move on from Russia in just a moment, but I want to go back to David Hearst and then to you again, former Deputy Prime Minister, to ask you about your reaction to the closer ties. But David, first of all, what does Turkey get out of its relationship with Russia? What is it doing here?
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting relationship because, and it's one that has noticeably cooled in the last year. But it's a relationship in which you can have troops and armed forces from Turkey and Russia, even though those troops in Russia are deniable. They are mercenaries, but they are actually very closely linked to Putin himself, the Wagner Group. In two war zones, in Syria, in Idlib, and in Turkey, and still maintain a relationship. I mean, it's extremely interesting. They are still Turkey and Russia are still the main.
Does that beg the question that if they are on opposite sides in that conflict, they must have mutual interests elsewhere that keep them tied? What would those interests be?
Well, obviously gas and the trade links, but I think strategically, Erdogan and Putin have learned to keep talking to each other and to strike deals. And they struck a deal in Idlib, even though Assad was being pushed by. Certainly, I wrote an article saying that the UAE had paid for him to break the ceasefire that Russia had negotiated, and Russia was extremely angry about that. There are joint patrols now between Russian and Turkish troops. In fact, the latest news is that a bomb killed both a Russian and a Turk in a joint patrol. And there is a lot of tension at the moment in Libya over whether or not Haftar and his forces will get out of Sirte.
Can I put this to the former Deputy Prime Minister Cevdet, if I may? Let's move on from Russia and let's talk about Libya. What is Turkey's goal there? Because there have been some commentators who've suggested that its support of the forces in there, the general national forces rather than the Haftar ones, is unpopular at home.
Actually, in Libya, there are two sides. One is legitimate government recognized by the UN and represents the Libyan people. On the other hand, you have a guy, General Haftar, and with his mercenaries, with outside support to his weapons, that tries to impose a military design upon Libyan people. In a way, he tries to be another Gaddafi for Libya. And in that struggle, Turkey is on the right side, actually. Turkey is supporting the legitimate government. We have historical ties, of course, with Libyan people, and we are neighbors also with Libya. I mean, through sea, we are neighbors, and we have so many historical ties. And in contemporary times, we also had lots of economic, social relations with Libya.
But is it
So
also
Turkey is
about
there
energy
to support.
security? Is it about oil and gas because of what Libya has there, that Turkey sees that
No, no,
it
no.
wants to put a
It
foothold
is
in that
about
country?
our multiple ties with Libya and Libyan people. Historically, we are very close to Libya. We have social ties, we have economic ties, and we are always supporting stability of Libya, actually, and the interest of Libyan people. Of course, we have common interest with Libyan people. The stability of Libya and development of Libya is in our interest, actually, and we just support using the resources of Libya, natural resources of Libya, for the development of Libyan people, not for some other colonial powers or imperial powers using these resources for their own interest. We just want to see Libyan resources used for the development of Libyan people. And in this process, of course, we will have
sorry to stop
economic
you, but we've got to bring everybody in on this conversation. So, Onur, I will put to you the suggestion that it's been mooted that Turkey's interest in Libya is to do with oil and gas because it is very worried about the East Med pipeline, which would go on the floor of the Mediterranean through the Greek part of Cyprus into Greece, and that Turkey might be compromised by that. It wants to be able to develop energy security elsewhere.
The commercial use of hydrocarbons is, I guess, just over 100 years old in our civilization. I can't think of any. I don't think anybody can show me any instance where even the Ottoman Turkey or the Republic of Turkey has shown any kind of a major battle or a minor battle where the cause was the security or the ownership or the profit of hydrocarbon reserves anywhere in the world. Turkey has never had this intention. Turkey has never displayed such an intention. Now, that's one point. The other point is, now, if we're talking about, we don't see anything in Libya when it comes to Turkish interest that would align with any type of a commercial oil or gas deal. However, if we're talking about securing the hydrocarbon reserves, the production of it in the East Med, and Turkey securing an agreement to make sure that its own rights, as Mr. Minister said, with the longest coastline in the Mediterranean, is trying to do something, I don't think anybody can oppose to that, because this is not only securing Turkish rights on those reserves, but it's also securing Libyan rights. I'm sure that everybody has been through the conversation that Egypt, Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, they all should make similar agreements with Turkey to make sure that their part of their shares are even higher. So this is only to secure Turkey's own rights.
Okay, time is against us, gentlemen, and there are two other areas in particular that I want to get into. David Hearst, I'll come to you first on this one. Turkey's changing relationship with NATO and the missile defense system. Where do you stand on that? What do you see happening?
It's again a scenario which has been played out really quite slowly. Turkey has bought S-400s from, which is a missile defense system from Russia, against the express wishes of Donald Trump, and there are still negotiations going on behind the scenes with America. Again, as the former Deputy Prime Minister said, now Turkey will not really do anything unless it's in its interests. And on missile defense, the one thing that Turkey's got a very formidable military, but it doesn't have state-of-the-art missile defense systems, and it either has to get them from Russia or from America. And so it's in a much more neutral position than it was before. I mean, I think what's behind all this is that since we were talking about the coup and what's changed since the coup, I think what's changed since the coup is the emergence, very, very much more so than before the coup, and it was accelerated by the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, of 2 camps, 3 camps vying for control of the Middle East and also the Eastern Mediterranean. You have Saudi, you have the Emirates, you have Israel, and you have Egypt and its satellites like Bahrain in one block, and they are, I suppose, the pro-US bloc. And they are really up for fighting a sort of counter-revolution against really any independent regime. It's not even a question of Islamism anymore, but really anyone who opposes their wish. And that's exactly what's happening in Libya. And on the other side, you have Turkey and Iran. And Turkey's there fighting the fight. And if it wasn't there, an awful lot of these causes would go undefended. And they're resisting this. And they're resisting this on behalf of the Libyans who support Tripoli and all over the place. Thank God Turkey does exist in that sense, because otherwise you'd see dictatorships all over the Mediterranean.
David, thank you. Cevdet, let me ask you about Africa and Asia. The number of embassies on the African continent has been increasing rapidly, particularly in the last few years. Turkey's ambitions there, I wondered if you could tell me what you think they are, and also a desire to win influence in the Far East.
Turkey is a developing country, and as we develop with our democracy, with our economy, our ties with the rest of the world is also multiplying and developing. And Africa is a very good case, in an example. As you have underlined, we have increased our embassies, but not only embassies actually. TICA as a development assistant institution, Turkish Airlines is flying many places in Africa, and we see a great potential in Africa actually. With its young population, dynamic population and resources, Africa is a big potential. It will develop.
I understand that. Why a military base in Mogadishu?
We are developing ties to contribute to the stability to our friendly nations in Africa. And that is done based on their own demands. And as you know, we are in Somalia with our hospitals, schools, economic activities. And in addition to that, we are supporting the building of the Somalian army for the security and stability of Somalia. Without security, without stability in Africa, we cannot also see developments and welfare for the people. We are there not to impose anything on Somali people. We are there to support their construction of their institutions, building their security forces, and also social and economic development. So it is a win-win.
I've got to stop you. I've got to stop you. I feel like the rudest man on earth, and just bring in Onur, because we only have about 2 minutes left. There's not much time to talk about the Far East and China, but I'm going to give you the opportunity. Turkey's relationship with China seems to ebb and flow.
And it seems that it may continue that way for a while. We have been working with China on the economical level for a long time. It's a developing relationship. China has been restarted its investments in Turkey with a bank, I think about a year and a half ago. ICBC came in. But again, it may be a bumpy road for both Turco-Sino relationship for two reasons. China seems to be experiencing a lot of trouble from the world when it comes to, within the after the COVID epidemic. With the commercial side of China is getting a lot of heat from Europe, especially. People are trying to shift their productions and what have you. And also there are some, they're basically, their record on human rights may be coming up more and more for those, especially in the West, to see this as an opportunity to bring down China a little bit more economically. So Turkish-Sino relationship may be affected, maybe a little bit more bumpy in the road up ahead. But this certainly, from what we see in the last couple of months after the COVID epidemic, this certainly is not shortening China's interest, especially in investments in Turkey.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for joining us from Ankara, former Deputy Prime Minister Onur Erim, joining us from Istanbul, and David Hearst in London, Editor-in-Chief of Middle East Eye. We thank you for joining us on this program. We thank you, wherever you're watching this program, for taking the time to do so. From me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, goodbye for now.